A single father finds a lost child in the darkening forest, barefoot, terrified, clutching a torn teddy bear. But when her mother arrives minutes later in a convoy of black SUVs with armed guards, guns drawn, and accusations flying, Caleb realizes this is no ordinary rescue. This is the beginning of a night that will change everything. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across the world. The Oregon wilderness had a way of swallowing sound. On most evenings, Caleb Brooks found that comforting, the silence broken only by wind through pine needles, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of his son's footsteps on the trail beside him. But on this particular October evening, as amber light filtered through the canopy and painted the forest floor in shades of copper and gold, that silence was shattered by something that made every instinct in his body snap to attention. A cry, faint, desperate, utterly out of place. Caleb stopped mid-stride, his weathered hand shooting up to signal his son. "Evan, hold up." The 12-year-old froze immediately, his backpack shifting as he turned. "Dad? What is it?" "Shh." Caleb tilted his head, straining to hear past the whisper of wind, past the creaking of ancient trees settling into the cool of approaching night. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the wilderness doing what it always did. Breathing, living, keeping its secrets. Then it came again. Clearer this time, a child's voice raw with fear and exhaustion. "Help! Somebody help!" The words were barely audible, carried on the evening breeze like smoke, but they hit Caleb with the force of a physical blow. In his 7 years working as a part-time forest ranger for the State Parks Department, he'd encountered plenty of situations: lost hikers, injured climbers, teenagers who'd wandered too far from their campsite and panicked when darkness fell. But there was something about a child's voice, that particular pitch of terror and confusion, that bypassed every rational thought process and went straight to the primal core of him, the father in him, the protector. "Someone's in trouble," he said, already adjusting the emergency pack on his shoulders, checking that his radio was clipped to his belt. His forest ranger training kicked in automatically. Assess, locate, respond. But underneath the professional calm was a current of urgency that made his heart pound harder. Evan's eyes widened. At 12, he'd been on enough trail patrols with his father to understand the gravity in that tone. "Should I call Mom?" "Your mom's 300 miles away in Portland, buddy. We handle this." Caleb was already moving, his boots finding purchase on the uneven ground with the confidence of someone who'd walked these trails hundreds of times. "Stay close to me. Watch your footing. If I tell you to stop, you stop. Understood?" "Yes, sir." They pushed deeper into the forest, leaving the marked trail behind. This section of the Cascade Range was dense with Douglas fir and western hemlock, the undergrowth thick with sword ferns and salal bushes. The terrain was treacherous even in daylight, exposed roots like gnarled fingers waiting to catch an unwary ankle, hidden dips in the forest floor concealed by layers of decomposing leaves and moss. As the sun continued its descent, shadows lengthened and merged, turning the spaces between trees into pools of gathering darkness. Caleb moved with purpose, his trained eyes scanning the environment even as he listened for another cry. The forest was a living map in his mind. He knew which ridges gave way to dangerous drops, which creek beds could turn into rushing torrents after a storm, which areas were prone to rock slides. Last night's storm had been a beast, he remembered. Thunder that shook the windows of his cabin, rain that came down in sheets so thick you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. The kind of storm that could strand someone, that could turn a simple situation into a nightmare. "There!" Evan's voice cracked with excitement and fear as he pointed to the left, toward a cluster of old-growth pines where the forest floor dipped into a natural hollow. Caleb saw it then, a flash of color that didn't belong. Pink fabric, bright against the muted browns and greens of the wilderness. He quickened his pace, his hand automatically reaching for the emergency blanket in his pack. And then he saw her. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, maybe 7 at the outside. A little girl with dark hair matted with pine needles and dirt, wearing what had once been a pink dress, now torn and stained beyond recognition. She was curled up beside a massive fallen log covered in emerald moss, her small body shaking with cold and shock. But what seized Caleb's attention most, what made something twist painfully in his chest, were her feet. Bare, scratched and bleeding, caked with mud. She was clutching something to her chest with desperate intensity, a stuffed teddy bear, or what remained of one. The toy was missing an arm and had a long tear down its middle, stuffing spilling out like entrails. The child's knuckles were white from gripping it so hard. "Oh, Jesus," Caleb breathed, already dropping to his knees beside her, shrugging out of his ranger jacket even as he approached. "Sweetheart? Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" The girl's head snapped up, and Caleb found himself looking into eyes so wide with terror that it physically hurt to see. She tried to scramble backward, but her back was already against the log. A wounded sound escaped her throat. It's okay, Caleb said quickly, holding up both hands in a gesture of peace, keeping his voice soft and steady despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. This child was in bad shape. He could see that at a glance. Hypothermia was a real concern. Shock, dehydration, God only knew what else. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Caleb. I'm a forest ranger. That means it's my job to help people who get lost in the woods. And this," he gestured to Evan, who was hanging back with wide eyes. "This is my son, Evan. We're the good guys, okay?" The girl's breathing was rapid and shallow, her whole body trembling. She pressed herself harder against the log, the torn teddy bear a shield between herself and these strangers. Caleb's mind was already racing through protocols. First priority, establish trust. Second, assess for injuries. Third, get her warm and safe. Fourth, find out what the hell had happened and where her parents were. But all of that depended on getting through to her, on breaking through the wall of shock and fear. He moved slowly, deliberately, pulling his jacket the rest of the way off and holding it out toward her. It was his favorite one. Worn canvas with the Oregon State Parks logo on the breast, lined with fleece, still warm from his body heat. "You must be freezing, honey. Will you let me put this around you, just to keep you warm?" For a long moment she didn't move. Didn't respond at all except for the continued trembling. Caleb waited, patient, despite every instinct screaming at him to just scoop her up and run for help. But that would be the worst thing he could do right now. This child was traumatized. Moving too fast, being too aggressive would only make it worse. "It's getting dark," he said conversationally, keeping his tone gentle, non-threatening. "And it's going to get cold tonight. Really cold. You know what hypothermia is? It's when your body gets too cold to work right. It's dangerous. And I don't want that to happen to you. So I'd really, really like to get this jacket on you. Is that okay?" Something in his voice must have gotten through, because the girl's grip on the teddy bear loosened just slightly. She looked at the jacket, then back at his face, studying him with an intensity that was heartbreaking in someone so young. "Where's your family?" Caleb asked softly. "Your mom or dad? Are they out here somewhere too?" At the mention of family, the girl's face crumpled. Her lower lip trembled, and tears spilled down her dirty cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the grime. "Mommy's car," she managed, her voice breaking on a sob. "Fire. There was fire." Ice flooded Caleb's veins. "Fire? Where? Honey, where was the fire?" But the girl had dissolved into tears, her small body shaking with the force of her sobs. She buried her face in the ratty teddy bear, making sounds of pure anguish that seemed too large for such a small person to contain. Caleb looked back at Evan, saw his own alarm reflected in his son's face. A car fire. That was serious. That meant there was likely a wreck somewhere, possibly with injured or worse. The storm last night could have washed out sections of the forest access roads, caused trees to fall. If someone had been trying to drive through here during or after the storm— "Evan," he said quietly, his voice taking on the tone that his son knew meant business. "I need you to get my radio, carefully. And I need you to try raising the ranger station. Tell them we have a found child, possible vehicle accident, and we need immediate assistance. Can you do that?" The boy nodded, already moving to his father's pack with the careful focus of a kid who'd been taught from an early age how to handle emergencies. Good kid, solid kid. Caleb felt a surge of pride even through his concern. He turned back to the little girl who was still crying but had started watching him again between sobs, making progress, slowly. Sweetheart, I'm going to come a little closer now, okay? I'm just going to put this jacket around you. I promise I won't hurt you. This time when he moved forward, she didn't try to pull away. Caleb took that as permission and gently draped his jacket over her shoulders, tugging it closed in front. The jacket swallowed her small frame, the sleeves hanging past her hands. Up close, he could see more details that made his jaw tighten. Bruises on her arms, scratches across her face, a nasty bump on her forehead. She'd been through something bad. There, he said, his voice catching slightly despite his best efforts to stay professional. That's better, isn't it? Warmer? She nodded, just barely. A tiny movement, but it was communication. It was a crack in the wall. What's your name, honey? The girl sniffled, wiping at her nose with the back of her hand. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean in to hear. Lila. That's a beautiful name. Caleb settled himself on the ground beside her, giving her space but close enough to help if needed. He was very aware of the temperature dropping as the sun sank lower, aware that they needed to get moving soon. But rushing her would be counterproductive. My name's Caleb Brooks, and that's my boy Evan. You already know that, though. We're going to take care of you, Lila. We're going to make sure you're safe and get you back to your family. I promise you that. Dad? Evan's voice was tight with frustration. Dad, the radio's not working. I'm getting nothing but static. Of course it wasn't. Caleb swore internally. They were in a dead zone, too deep in the forest, too many ridges and valleys interfering with the signal. It happened sometimes, especially after big storms when the atmosphere was still unsettled. He'd have to get to higher ground or get her back to the cabin before he could call for help. Okay, he said, making his voice confident, decisive. New plan. We're going to take Lila back to our cabin. It's not far, maybe half a mile from here. We've got heat, food, medical supplies, and a landline that works. Sound good? Lila looked up at him with those enormous eyes, still afraid but also desperately wanting to trust, wanting to believe that someone was going to make this nightmare end. Can you walk, sweetie? Or would you like me to carry you? Those feet look pretty hurt. She looked down at her feet as if seeing them for the first time, and fresh tears welled up. They hurt, she whispered. They hurt really bad. I bet they do. You've been very, very brave, Lila. Braver than most grown-ups I know. Caleb stood up slowly, then held out his arms. How about this? I'll carry you. You just hold on to that teddy bear and hold on to me, and we'll get you somewhere safe and warm. Deal? After a moment's hesitation, Lila reached up with one arm, the other still clutching the damaged stuffed animal. Caleb lifted her as gently as possible, feeling how light she was, how fragile. She couldn't weigh more than 45 pounds. She tucked her head against his shoulder, and he felt her grip tighten on his shirt. Evan, lead the way back. Use your flashlight. Watch the trail. Yes, sir. They moved through the darkening forest, Evan's flashlight beam dancing ahead of them, Caleb's longer strides eating up the distance while his mind worked through what needed to happen next. First, get to the cabin. Second, warm her up, check her over for serious injuries. Third, get help. But overlaying all of that was a growing unease, a sense that there was more to this situation than a simple case of a lost child. Her clothes, though filthy and torn, were expensive. He could tell that even in their ruined state. The fabric of the dress, the construction. This wasn't some cheap department store outfit. And despite everything she'd been through, despite her terror and exhaustion, there was something in the way she held herself, in her careful manners even now, that spoke of a child who'd been raised in a particular kind of environment. An environment with money. Significant money. And then there were her words. Mommy's car. Fire. Not Mom's car, but Mommy's. The slight precision in her speech, even through the tears and fear. The way she'd said please when he'd first draped the jacket over her, so quietly he'd almost missed it. Who was this child? They broke through into the clearing where Caleb's cabin sat. a modest structure he'd built himself over the course of 3 summers, wood and stone and love translated into shelter. It wasn't much, but it was solid and warm and safe. Right now, that was all that mattered. "We're here, Lila," he said softly as he carried her up the porch steps. "We're home. You're safe now." Inside, he settled her on the worn leather couch near the wood stove while Evan got the fire going, coaxing the embers back to life and feeding in kindling until flames caught and spread. The cabin filled with golden light and growing warmth. Caleb grabbed the first aid kit from under the sink and a stack of clean towels from the bathroom. "Let's take a look at those feet, okay?" He knelt in front of her, moving slowly, telegraphing every motion. "I need to clean them up and put some bandages on. It might sting a little bit, but I'll be as gentle as I can." Lila nodded, watching him with those enormous dark eyes as he carefully cleaned the cuts and scrapes, applied antibiotic ointment, wrapped her feet in gauze. She winced a few times but didn't pull away, didn't cry out. Tough kid. Too tough, maybe. Like she'd learned somewhere along the way that complaining didn't help. While he worked, Evan warmed up a can of chicken noodle soup on the camp stove, bringing it over in a mug once it was ready. "Here," he said, offering it to Lila with a shy smile. "It's pretty good. My dad makes it when I'm sick." "It's from a can, bud," Caleb said with a slight smile. "Campbell's makes it. I just heat it up." "Still counts," Evan insisted. For the first time since they'd found her, something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched Lila's lips. She took the mug in both hands, sipping carefully, and Caleb watched her with a mixture of relief and continued concern. She was warming up. That was good. But she needed more than warmth and soup. She needed her family. She needed answers. He stood, pulling out his cell phone and checking it. 1 bar of service. Weak, but maybe enough. He moved toward the window, holding the phone up, trying to find a sweet spot where the signal was strongest. As he did, his eyes landed on Lila again, and he noticed something he'd missed before in the chaos and fading light of the forest. Around her left wrist was a bracelet, not a child's plastic friendship bracelet or a cheap bauble. This was real jewelry, delicate gold links, expensive craftsmanship, and engraved on a small plate, Lila Hensley. Caleb froze, the phone still held aloft. As his mind made connections he wished it wouldn't make. Hensley. He knew that name. Everyone in the Pacific Northwest knew that name. Victoria Hensley, tech billionaire, founder and CEO of Hensley Innovations, one of the most successful tech companies to come out of Seattle in the past decade. She was worth billions, a regular feature in business magazines and technology conferences. And 2 days ago, there had been news. Something about an emergency landing. A private jet having to make an unscheduled stop somewhere in Oregon due to mechanical failure. There had been speculation, brief mentions on the evening news, but then nothing more. The story had faded, the way stories about rich people often did when the rich people didn't want attention. But here was a little girl, Lila Hensley, in the middle of the Oregon wilderness, talking about fire in her mother's car. What the hell had happened? Before Caleb could process this fully, before he could decide what to do with this information, light flooded through the cabin windows. Not the soft gold of the wood stove or the steady beam of a flashlight. This was harsh, bright. The kind of light that came from multiple sources, from high-powered LEDs mounted on vehicles. Headlights. Multiple vehicles. Coming fast. Evan jumped up from where he'd been sitting on the floor, startled. "Dad? What is that?" Caleb moved to the window, peering out into the darkness beyond the reach of the cabin's porch light. His driveway, if you could call the rutted dirt path a driveway, was suddenly alive with movement. Black SUVs, at least 3 of them, maybe more. They came to abrupt stops in a semicircle, doors flying open before the engines were even fully off. Men emerged, lots of men, wearing dark clothing, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of military or security training. Caleb's ranger instincts, honed by years of dealing with everything from poachers to armed survivalists, kicked into high gear. This was not a rescue party, or rather, not just a rescue party. This was something else entirely. One more figure emerged from the lead vehicle. A woman, tall, wearing what had once probably been an elegant coat, but was now soaked and mud-splattered. Even from a distance, even in the harsh glare of headlights and shadows, Caleb could see the desperation in every line of her body as she stared at his cabin. "Lila!" The woman's voice cut through the night, raw with anguish and hope and terror, all mixed together. "Lila!" On the couch, the little girl's head snapped up. The mug of soup fell from her hands, splashing onto the floor, forgotten. Her eyes went wide, and then she was moving, scrambling off the couch, the blanket Caleb had wrapped around her falling away, running toward the door on her bandaged feet with a speed born of pure, desperate recognition. "Mommy!" Caleb moved fast, intercepting her before she could fling the door open and run out into what was still a potentially dangerous situation. "Wait, Lila. Wait." But she was fighting him, trying to get past, her small fists pounding against his chest. "Let me go! That's my mommy! Mommy!" Outside, the woman had heard. She was running toward the cabin now, and the men in dark clothing were moving with her, hands going to their belts, to weapons that Caleb could see clearly now in the spill of light from the open vehicle doors. He made a split-second decision. This was Lila's mother. Whatever else was happening, whatever the hell the situation was, that much was clear from the child's reaction. Keeping them apart was cruel and it was dangerous. The tension outside was ramping up fast. He could feel it, that electric charge in the air that came right before violence. Caleb pulled open the door and stepped out onto the porch, still holding Lila, though she was squirming and crying and reaching toward the woman running toward them. "I have her!" he called out, his voice loud enough to carry, pitched to cut through chaos. "She's safe. She's unhurt." The woman stumbled to a halt at the base of the porch steps, and Caleb got his first clear look at Victoria Hensley in person, rather than in magazine photos or news clips. She was beautiful in that way that money could buy. Perfect bone structure, expensive clothes, professional styling, but right now she was also utterly wrecked. Her hair was loose and wild, her face streaked with what might have been tears or rain or both, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. And when she looked up at Lila in Caleb's arms, the sound that came out of her was something between a sob and a prayer. "Baby. Oh God, baby." Caleb set Lila down, and the little girl flew down the steps and into her mother's arms. Victoria collapsed to her knees in the mud, clutching her daughter, rocking her, making sounds that had no words, just pure emotion. Lila was crying, Victoria was crying, and for a moment the armed men, the black SUVs, the entire strange and dangerous tableau faded into insignificance. This was a mother and child reunited. Everything else was secondary. Caleb stayed on the porch, one hand on the railing, watching. Behind him, he was aware of Evan hovering in the doorway. Around the driveway, the security team was still on high alert, eyes scanning the forest, hands near weapons, but their primary focus had shifted to the woman and child. Victoria pulled back just enough to cup Lila's face in her hands, checking her over with the frantic intensity of a mother who'd been certain she'd lost everything. "Are you hurt? Baby, are you hurt? Let me see." "I'm okay, Mommy," Lila said through her tears, her voice small but steady. "The man helped me. He found me. He made me safe." Victoria's eyes lifted then, finding Caleb's across the distance, and in that moment, in the weight of her gaze, he saw everything. The gratitude, the relief, the lingering fear, and something else. Something that looked like guilt. She stood slowly, lifting Lila with her, holding her daughter on her hip like she'd never let go again. One of the security men moved forward, trying to take the child, but Victoria waved him off sharply. She walked toward the porch on unsteady legs, and when she spoke, her voice was rough with emotion. "You found her." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, of profound gratitude, and something more. Caleb nodded. "About 45 minutes ago. In the forest, about half a mile east of here. She was alone, scared, but she's tough. You've got a brave kid, Mrs. Hensley." The use of her name made something flicker across Victoria's face. Surprise, wariness, a resigned understanding that of course he'd figured out who she was. But before she could respond, one of the security men stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of bearing that screamed ex-military special forces. His eyes were cold as they assessed Caleb. "Ma'am, we need to secure the area, and we need to question this individual." "Question me?" Caleb's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "I found a lost child and brought her to safety. That's what happened here." The security man's jaw tightened. "There was a kidnapping attempt, sir. Sabotage. We have protocols." "Jake, stop." Victoria's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She shifted Lila's weight on her hip, and the little girl buried her face in her mother's neck, exhausted and overwhelmed. "Stop. This man saved my daughter's life. He didn't have to. He could have walked past. He could have assumed someone else would handle it. But he didn't. He found her. He cared for her. He brought her home to safety." She looked at Caleb again, and this time there were tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "I owe you everything. Everything." The security man, Jake, didn't look convinced. His hand remained near his weapon, and his eyes continued to scan Caleb, the cabin, the surrounding area with professional suspicion. "Ma'am, with respect, we don't know." "If I were one of them," Caleb said quietly, his eyes meeting Jake's without flinching, "if I had been part of whatever happened to you, your boss wouldn't be standing here hugging her daughter right now. Use your head, man. This isn't complicated." A tense silence followed. Then slowly, Jake stepped back, though his posture remained wary. Victoria looked at Caleb with an expression he couldn't quite read, something like wonder, mixed with exhaustion and lingering fear. "I need to get her to a hospital," Victoria said, though she seemed reluctant to move, as if leaving this place, leaving Caleb's presence, would somehow break the spell of safety. "We have a medic in the team, but she needs to be properly checked." "I cleaned and bandaged her feet," Caleb said. "Gave her soup, warmed her up. She has some bruises, a bump on her head. She mentioned fire, something about your car, but she didn't tell me much more than that. She was too scared, too shocked." Victoria's expression crumpled again. "The plane. Our plane had to make an emergency landing yesterday. Mechanical failure. We thought—" She stopped, shaking her head. "We thought it was just bad luck. A storm, equipment failure. But it was sabotage. Someone tampered with the plane. When we were on the ground, trying to figure out what to do, they came. Men with guns. They wanted Lila. They wanted to take her." The pieces were starting to come together in Caleb's mind, forming a picture he wished wasn't so clear. A kidnapping attempt. A botched one by the sound of it. Chaos in the aftermath of a forced landing. A child fleeing into the forest. "There was a car," Victoria continued, her voice breaking. "We tried to escape in a car, one of the service vehicles from the airstrip. But they chased us, shot at us. The car went off the road, caught fire. I thought—" She couldn't finish. Couldn't say out loud what she'd thought. What any mother would think in that situation. Lila stirred against her mother's shoulder, her small voice muffled but audible. "I ran, Mommy. You told me to run, so I did. I ran and ran and ran until I couldn't anymore. You did perfect, baby. You did so perfect." Victoria pressed kisses to Lila's hair, her temple, her forehead. Then she looked at Caleb again, and this time the gratitude in her eyes was so intense it was almost painful to witness. "How can I ever thank you? How can I possibly—" "You don't need to thank me," Caleb said simply. "I'm a father too." He gestured toward Evan, still standing in the doorway, watching everything with wide eyes. "That's my son. If it were him out there, lost and alone, I'd hope someone would do the same. That's all this is, just doing what's right." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, and Caleb had the sense that she was reevaluating him, seeing him differently than she had initially. Not as a complication or a potential threat, but as something else entirely. "You're a good man, Mr. Brooks," she said softly. "Caleb. Just Caleb." "Caleb, then." She adjusted Lila's weight again, and one of the security team moved forward with a blanket, draping it over the little girl's shoulders. "I need to take her to the hospital, but She hesitated, seeming uncertain for the first time since she'd arrived. "Will you be here? Tomorrow? I'd like to come back. To talk. To thank you properly. If that's all right." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'll be here. We're not going anywhere." Victoria smiled, just barely, and then she was moving toward the SUVs, surrounded by her security team, Lila safe in her arms. Caleb watched them go, watched the convoy turn around in his narrow driveway with practiced efficiency, watched the taillights disappear down the rutted path toward the main road. The forest settled back into silence. The night reclaimed the space that had been temporarily invaded by artificial light and human drama. And Caleb stood on his porch, feeling the weight of what had just happened settling onto his shoulders like a physical thing. Evan came out to stand beside him, slipping his hand into his father's larger one. "That was crazy, Dad." "Yeah, bud. That was pretty crazy." "You think she'll really come back tomorrow?" Caleb looked down at his son, at the earnest question in his young face, and found he didn't have a simple answer. Victoria Hensley's world was so far removed from his own that they might as well have been living on different planets. She had wealth beyond imagining, power, influence. He had a modest cabin in the woods, a part-time job with the Forest Service, and a son he was raising on his own after his ex-wife had decided city life suited her better than rural isolation. What could a woman like that possibly have to say to a man like him once the immediate crisis was over? Once Lila was safe and the fear had faded and normal life resumed? But then he remembered the way Victoria had looked at him in that final moment before leaving. The way she'd said, "You're a good man," like it meant something, like it mattered. "I don't know," Caleb said honestly, pulling Evan close against his side. "But I guess we'll find out." They stood there together for a while longer, father and son, while the Oregon night closed in around them and the stars began to emerge from behind thinning clouds. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out. The forest returned to normal, as if the last hour had been nothing more than a strange dream. But Caleb knew better. Something had shifted tonight. Something had changed in a way that couldn't be undone. He'd crossed paths with a world completely foreign to his own, and despite everything, despite all logic and reason, he had the feeling that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Morning came too early and brought with it a headache that felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through Caleb's temples. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying the events of the previous evening on an endless loop. The cry in the forest, Lila's terrified face, the sudden arrival of armed security, Victoria Hensley's desperate gratitude. Every time he'd started to drift off, some new detail would surface, pulling him back to wakefulness. By 6 a.m., he gave up entirely and padded into the kitchen to start coffee. Through the window above the sink, he could see the first pale light of dawn filtering through the pines, turning the world silver and soft. The muddy tire tracks from the SUV convoy were still visible in his driveway, the only physical evidence that last night had actually happened. "Dad?" Evan's voice came from the doorway, thick with sleep. The kid was already dressed in his school clothes, jeans and a faded Trailblazers t-shirt. "Did that really happen? Or did I dream it?" "It happened." Caleb poured himself a mug of coffee, inhaling the bitter steam. "You want some breakfast? I can make pancakes." "You never make pancakes on school days." "Today's different." Evan slid into his usual chair at the small wooden table, watching his father with the kind of careful attention that meant he was thinking hard about something. At 12, he was at that age where he was starting to see the world with more complexity, starting to understand that adults didn't always have all the answers. "She's really rich, huh? That lady, Lila's mom." "Very rich." Caleb pulled out the pancake mix, found a mixing bowl, started measuring ingredients with the automatic movements of long practice. "Victoria Hensley. She owns a tech company in Seattle, Hensley Innovations. They make some kind of software for businesses. I don't really understand it, but your Uncle Tom told me about it once. Said she's worth billions." "With a B?" "With a B." Evan whistled low. "And those guys with the guns? They were like bodyguards?" "Security detail. When you're that rich, you need people to protect you, especially when there are bad people trying to hurt you or your family." Caleb didn't want to go into too much detail about kidnapping attempts and sabotaged planes. Evan was mature for his age, but he was still a kid, still deserved to feel safe in his own world. "Are they going to come back, like she said?" That was the question that had kept Caleb awake half the night. "I don't know, bud. Maybe, maybe not." Rich people say a lot of things in the moment, when emotions are running high, but once reality sets back in, once they're back in their own world, he shrugged, flipping the first pancake. We'll see. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence the way they often did. Caleb drove Evan to the bus stop 3 miles down the main road, waited until the yellow bus appeared around the bend and swallowed his son up for the day. Then he drove back to the cabin, intending to get some work done on the stack of trail maintenance reports that had been piling up on his desk. But he couldn't focus. Every sound from outside made him look up, wondering if it was another convoy of SUVs. Every passing hour felt weighted with the possibility that Victoria Hensley would or wouldn't keep her word. By noon, he'd convinced himself she wasn't coming. Of course she wasn't coming. She had a company to run, a daughter to take care of, probably an entire team of lawyers and security experts trying to figure out what had happened and how to prevent it from happening again. The last thing on her mind would be driving back out to some ranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere to say thank you to a man who'd simply done the right thing. He was outside chopping wood when he heard the vehicles. This time, there were only 2 SUVs, and they moved more slowly down the driveway, less urgently. Caleb set down the axe and wiped his hands on his jeans, watching as the vehicles came to a stop. The security team emerged first. He recognized Jake from last night, along with 2 others. They fanned out with the same practiced efficiency, scanning the area before one of them opened the rear door of the lead vehicle. Victoria Hensley stepped out, and Caleb felt something catch in his chest. She looked different in daylight, without the desperation and fear that had defined her last night. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she wore clothes that probably cost more than Caleb made in a month: designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, leather boots that had definitely never seen actual mud before yesterday. But there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of a night as sleepless as his own, and when she saw him standing there by the woodpile, her expression softened into something genuine. Caleb? She said his name like it meant something, walking toward him with a purposeful stride. You're here. I told you I would be. He was suddenly painfully aware of how he must look, sweaty from chopping wood, wearing his oldest flannel shirt and work jeans with a hole in one knee. But Victoria didn't seem to notice or care. How's Lila? He asked. She's okay. Remarkably okay, considering everything. The doctors checked her over last night. Bruises, scratches, minor dehydration, shock, but nothing serious. Nothing that won't heal. Victoria stopped a few feet away from him, her hands tucked into her pockets. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation, but she refused to let me out of her sight. So we stayed together in a private suite. She barely slept. Every time she started to drift off, she'd wake up crying, asking if it was safe. Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew that kind of trauma. Had seen it before in people who'd been through serious ordeals in the wilderness. The body might recover quickly, but the mind took longer. That's normal. It'll get better, but it takes time. The psychiatrist said the same thing. Victoria looked past him at the cabin, at the forest beyond, and something complicated crossed her face. She wants to see you. Lila, I mean. She's been asking about you since she woke up. About the forest man and his son who gave her soup. She wants to say thank you. She doesn't need to thank me. I know, but I'd like to bring her by if you're willing. I think it would help her to see that you're real, that this place is real, that she's safe. Victoria met his eyes again, and he saw vulnerability there, carefully controlled but present. Would that be all right? Of course, you don't need to ask permission. Something like relief flickered across Victoria's features. She turned and made a gesture toward the second SUV, and a moment later the rear door opened. A woman emerged first, middle-aged, professional-looking, clearly some kind of assistant or handler. And then Lila climbed out, moving slowly on her bandaged feet. She was wearing clean clothes now, a soft pink hoodie and leggings, her dark hair pulled back with a headband. But despite the cleaned-up appearance, she still looked small and fragile, like something that might break if handled too roughly. When she saw Caleb, though, her face lit up with recognition and something that looked like joy. It's you! She started walking faster, then broke into an awkward run hop on her sore feet. Mommy, it's really him! Victoria hurried after her daughter, catching up just as Lila reached Caleb. The little girl looked up at him with those enormous dark eyes, and without warning, she wrapped her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for being nice. Thank you for the jacket and the soup and for not being scary." Caleb felt his throat tighten. He crouched down to her level, gently extricating himself from the hug so he could look at her properly. "Hey there, kiddo. How are those feet doing?" "They hurt less today. The doctor said I was very brave." She said it with a hint of pride, like she'd accomplished something significant. Then her expression turned more serious. "I brought your jacket back, and I wanted to give you something, but Mommy said I had to ask first if it was okay." "Give me something?" Lila reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a rock, Caleb realized, smooth and dark, probably from a riverbed somewhere. But Lila had decorated it with paint, turning it into something else entirely. A tiny face smiled up at him, with wild yellow hair and a green shirt. Words were written on the back in careful, childish letters. "My hero." Hero. She'd meant hero, but the misspelling somehow made it more precious. "I made it this morning," Lila explained. "At the hospital. The nurse gave me paints. That's you. Because you saved me." She pressed it into his hand, her small fingers curling his larger ones around it. "You have to keep it forever, okay? It's magic. It means you'll always be safe." Caleb found he couldn't speak for a moment. He looked at the painted rock, at this child's offering of gratitude and affection, and felt something crack open in his chest. When he finally found his voice, it was rougher than usual. "I'll keep it forever, I promise. It'll go right on my desk where I can see it every day." Lila beamed at him, satisfied. Then she looked around with curiosity. "Can I see inside your house, where you gave me the soup?" "Lila, honey, we shouldn't impose," Victoria started. But Caleb was already standing, gesturing toward the cabin. "It's not imposing. Come on in. Fair warning, though. It's nothing fancy. Just a cabin." "I like cabins," Lila announced with the confident certainty of a 6-year-old stating facts. "They're cozy." Inside, Lila explored with the unself-conscious curiosity of a child who'd been through trauma and survived it. She touched the leather couch where she'd sat last night, examined the wood stove, peered at the books on Caleb's shelves. Victoria followed more slowly, her security detail remaining outside at Caleb's insistence. He watched her take in his modest home, the worn furniture, the simple kitchen, the handmade shelves, and the collection of forest ranger manuals mixed in with paperback novels and Evan's school photos on the walls. "You built this yourself?" Victoria asked, running her hand along a wooden beam. "Over 3 summers, yeah. Had some help from my brother and a buddy from the ranger station, but mostly it was just me and a lot of YouTube tutorials." He poured water into the kettle, set it on the stove. "Tea? Coffee?" "Tea would be wonderful, thank you." They settled at the small table, the same one where Evan had sat that morning asking if last night had been real. Lila had found a box of colored pencils in a drawer and was happily drawing at the other end of the table, creating what appeared to be a forest scene with elaborate detail. Victoria wrapped her hands around her mug of tea, and for a moment they sat in silence. "I need to tell you what happened," Victoria said finally, her voice low enough that Lila wouldn't hear clearly. "You deserve to know, and I need to explain why all of this happened." Caleb leaned back in his chair, listening. "The plane didn't fail mechanically," Victoria began. "Someone sabotaged it, compromised the hydraulics. We were supposed to crash, I think, or at least be forced into a situation where we'd be vulnerable. The pilot managed to get us down on an old airstrip about 15 miles from here, abandoned, barely functional, but enough. We thought we'd just wait for rescue, call for help, get picked up." She paused, her fingers tightening around the mug. "But they were waiting for us. The people who sabotaged the plane, they were waiting. Kidnappers. Ransomware criminals. That's what the FBI thinks anyway. They've been tracking a group that targets wealthy tech executives, sabotage the plane, grab the executive or their family, demand cryptocurrency ransom and data access. Usually they just want money, but sometimes they want corporate secrets, proprietary information. Victoria's voice was steady, but Caleb could hear the fury underneath, the barely contained anger of a mother whose child had been threatened. They wanted Lila, specifically. They knew she'd be on the plane with me, knew she'd be the leverage they needed. But something went wrong. My head of security was with us. Jake, you met him last night. Former Navy SEAL, utterly competent. When they came, he fought back, got us to a vehicle. We tried to run. Victoria's eyes went distant, remembering. They chased us, shot at us. I was driving, barely keeping the car on the road, and then a tire blew and we went off into the ditch. The car caught fire, electrical fire, gas leak, I don't even know. Jake got me out, but Lila... She stopped, swallowing hard. Lila's door was jammed, and I told her to run. I screamed at her to run, to get into the forest, to hide, and she did. My brave, terrified 6-year-old daughter ran into the wilderness alone because I told her to. You saved her life. I sent her into the forest, alone, barefoot, terrified. Victoria's voice cracked. I've been replaying that moment in my head over and over. What if she'd fallen? What if she'd gotten more seriously hurt? What if you hadn't been there? But I was there, and she did exactly what you told her to do. She survived because you taught her to listen, to be brave, to save herself. Caleb leaned forward, his voice firm. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, and you made the right one. Don't torture yourself with what-ifs. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw her reassessing again, seeing something she hadn't expected. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone who'd want something from me. Everyone always wants something. Money, access, connections, something. She said it without bitterness, just as a statement of fact. But you just helped, because it was the right thing to do. That's rare in my world. Rarer than you'd think. It shouldn't be rare in any world. A small smile touched Victoria's lips. No, it shouldn't be. She sipped her tea, watching Lila draw. The FBI has agents crawling all over the crash site now. They found the men, 3 of them subdued by Jake and his team. They're in custody, but the investigation is going to take time. And in the meantime, she trailed off, uncertain. In the meantime, Lila's traumatized, and you're both trying to figure out how to feel safe again. Yes. Victoria set down her mug. I wanted to come here today for 2 reasons. First, obviously, to thank you properly, which I haven't really done. So, thank you, Caleb. Thank you for saving my daughter. Thank you for treating her with kindness when she needed it most. Thank you for being exactly who you are. And the second reason? Victoria hesitated, and Caleb got the impression she was about to say something she'd been wrestling with. I want to do something for you, not as payment. This isn't transactional, but as gratitude. Let me set up a college fund for Evan. Let me make a donation to the ranger station in your name. No. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. I appreciate the thought, really, but that's not necessary. Caleb, I didn't help Lila because I expected a reward. I helped her because she needed help, because it was the right thing to do. That's it. That's the whole story. He met Victoria's eyes steadily. If you want to donate to the ranger station, do it because you believe in what they do, not because you feel obligated. If you want to set up college funds, do it for kids who need it. But don't do it for me. I don't need that. Victoria stared at him, and something like wonder crossed her face. You really mean that? Yeah, I really mean that. You're either the most genuine person I've ever met, or you're an idiot. Probably a little of both, Caleb admitted with a slight smile. Victoria laughed, surprising herself. It was a real laugh, brief but genuine, and it transformed her face entirely. For a moment, she wasn't a billionaire CEO or a traumatized mother. She was just a woman sharing tea with a man who'd helped her, finding unexpected common ground. Lila looked up from her drawing. Mommy, can we stay a little longer? I want to finish my picture. We shouldn't take up too much of Caleb's time, honey. It's fine, Caleb said. Stay as long as you want. I've got paperwork to do anyway. I'll just be at my desk in the corner there. You two make yourselves comfortable. So they stayed. Victoria and Lila occupied the table while Caleb worked through trail maintenance reports at his cluttered desk by the window. Occasionally he'd glance over and catch Victoria watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Lila finished her drawing, a detailed scene of the forest with trees and animals and a little house that was clearly meant to be the cabin, and presented it to Caleb with the same ceremonial importance she'd given the painted rock. When the school bus rumbled past on the main road, Caleb checked his watch. 3:30 already. That's my cue. I need to go pick up Evan from the bus stop. We should go anyway, Victoria said, standing. We've taken up enough of your day. You're welcome to come meet him, if you want. Evan was pretty invested in the whole rescue last night. He'd probably like to know Lila's okay. Lila's eyes lit up. Can we, Mommy? Please? Victoria looked uncertain, but she nodded. All right, but just for a moment. They drove in convoy to the bus stop, Caleb in his beat-up truck, the two SUVs following. When they arrived, the bus was just pulling up. Evan climbed down the steps, saw his father's truck, then saw the SUVs, and his eyes went wide. Dad, what's... He stopped as Victoria and Lila emerged from the vehicle. Oh, wow. Hi. Hi. Lila bounced over to him, all the shyness from last night gone. I'm Lila. Remember? You gave me soup. It was really good soup. Thanks. It was just Campbell's, though. My dad heated it up. It was still good. Lila studied him with interest. How old are you? 12. That's big. I'm 6. Well, almost 7. My birthday is next month. She said it with the pride of someone approaching a significant milestone. Do you like drawing? I like drawing. I drew your house. Well, your cabin. Your dad said I could keep it. Evan looked helplessly at his father, clearly overwhelmed by this small whirlwind of a child. Caleb just grinned. Lila's feeling better, he said by way of explanation. Victoria stepped forward, extending her hand to Evan with the same formal courtesy she might give a business associate. You must be Evan. I'm Victoria. It's nice to meet you properly. Your father told me you were very helpful last night, keeping calm and helping take care of Lila. That was impressive. Evan shook her hand, his face going slightly red at the praise. I didn't really do anything. Dad did everything. You did more than you think, Victoria said kindly. Then she glanced at Caleb. We really should go, but... She hesitated, and Caleb could see her working through something in her mind. Would it be all right if we came back? Lila's therapist thinks it might be helpful for her to maintain contact with you for a little while, to help process what happened, to reinforce that the safe place and the safe people were real. Of course, Caleb said without hesitation. Any time. You're always welcome here. Victoria's expression softened. Thank you. Again. For everything. She looked at Evan. Both of you. They watched the SUVs drive away, Lila waving enthusiastically from the back window until they disappeared around the bend. Evan turned to his father with wide eyes. That was Victoria Hensley. Like, the actual Victoria Hensley. Dad, do you know who she is? I know she's the mother of a scared little girl who needed help. That's who she is to me. But Dad, she's famous. She's on the cover of magazines. She's worth like billions of dollars. And she was just here, at our bus stop, talking to us like normal people. She is a normal person, Bud. She just has more money than most. Caleb ruffled Evan's hair as they climbed into the truck. Come on, let's go home. You've got homework, and I've got to figure out what we're having for dinner. Can we have Campbell's soup? Evan asked with a slight grin. Smart ass. That night, after Evan had gone to bed, Caleb sat at his desk with the painted rock Lila had given him. He turned it over in his hands, studying the crude but heartfelt artwork, the misspelled hero on the back. Such a small thing. Such an enormous thing. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. This is Victoria. I got your number from the ranger station registry. I hope that's okay. I wanted to say thank you again, and to let you know that Lila slept through the night for the first time since the crash. I think seeing you today, seeing that you were real and that the cabin was real, helped her feel safe. So thank you. For that too. Caleb stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Glad she's sleeping better. That's what matters. You're both welcome here any time. Truly. A pause. then 3 dots indicating she was typing. I'd like to take you up on that. If you're serious, Lila wants to come back. And honestly, I think I do too. Your cabin, your life, it's so different from mine. It's peaceful, real. I didn't realize how much I needed that until today. Caleb read the message twice, feeling something shift in his understanding of the situation. This wasn't just about Lila's recovery anymore. This was about Victoria's too, about a woman who'd almost lost everything finding unexpected solace in a place far removed from her normal world. Door's always open, he typed back. Literally, I don't even lock it half the time. A laughing emoji appeared. Then, that's terrifying from a security standpoint, but also kind of wonderful. Good night, Caleb, and thank you. Good night, Victoria. He set the phone down and looked out the window at the forest beyond, dark and deep and full of secrets. 24 hours ago, his life had been simple, predictable, unremarkable. Now he was texting with a billionaire CEO who wanted to bring her daughter back to his cabin because they both found something here they needed. Life was strange sometimes, strange and unpredictable and occasionally unexpectedly beautiful. Caleb placed the painted rock on his desk where he could see it from his chair, then headed to bed. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. For now, he'd done what he could. He'd helped a child. He'd offered kindness when it was needed. And somehow, impossibly, that simple act had opened a door between two worlds that should never have touched. He fell asleep wondering where that door might lead and whether he was ready to find out. 3 days passed before Victoria and Lila returned, and in that time, Caleb found himself thinking about them more than he wanted to admit. He'd catch himself checking his phone for messages that didn't come, listening for the sound of vehicles on the road that turned out to be just the mail truck or his neighbor's tractor. It irritated him, this distraction. He wasn't the type to get caught up in things that were none of his business, and whatever was happening in Victoria Hensley's world was definitely none of his business. But then his phone would buzz with a simple text. Lila drew another picture today. She wanted you to know it has 17 trees in it because that's apparently very important. And he'd find himself smiling despite his better judgment. When they finally did show up, it was late afternoon on a Saturday. Caleb was working on replacing some rotted boards on his porch when he heard the now familiar sound of the SUVs making their way down his drive. This time, there was only one vehicle, and only Jake emerged from the driver's seat before opening the back door for Victoria and Lila. "We're not staying long," Victoria said as she approached, though there was something in her voice that suggested she wished they could. She was dressed more casually this time, jeans and a simple sweater, boots that looked like they might actually be meant for walking rather than just looking expensive. "Lila has a therapy session in 2 hours, but she's been asking to see you every day since we left. I finally gave in." "I made you something," Lila announced, running up the porch steps with considerably more confidence than she'd had 3 days ago. Her feet were still bandaged, but the limp was nearly gone. She thrust a folder at Caleb. "Open it! Open it!" Inside was a collection of drawings, each one more elaborate than the last. Forests and animals and people. One showed a man and a boy standing next to a cabin. Another depicted what was clearly meant to be the moment Caleb had found her in the woods, though she'd added flowers and butterflies to make it less scary. The last one showed everyone together. Caleb, Evan, Victoria, Lila, even Jake standing awkwardly in the background with his serious expression. "This is us," Lila explained unnecessarily, pointing to each figure. "That's you, and that's Evan, and that's me and Mommy, and that's Jake. He doesn't smile much, but I put a small smile on him because I think he wants to smile. He just forgets how." From his position by the SUV, Jake made a sound that might have been a cough or might have been a suppressed laugh. "These are incredible, Lila," Caleb said, and meant it. There was real talent in the drawings, a natural eye for composition and detail. "Can I keep them?" "That's why I made them. They're for you, to say thank you, and also because I like drawing and Mommy says I should share my art with people I care about." She said it with the unconscious honesty of a child who hadn't yet learned to guard her feelings. Victoria touched her daughter's shoulder gently. "Why don't you show Jake those pine cones you wanted to collect? I saw some really big ones over by those trees." "Okay!" Lila bounded off the porch, calling for Jake to follow. The security man went without complaint, and Caleb got the distinct impression this wasn't the first time he'd been assigned to pinecone collection duty. Victoria watched them go, then turned back to Caleb. She's been having nightmares. Not every night, but often enough. She wakes up crying, asking if the bad men are coming back. The therapist says it's normal, that it'll fade with time, but she trailed off, her professional composure cracking slightly. I can't stand seeing her scared. I can't stand knowing that I put her in that situation. You didn't put her in that situation. Criminals did. Bad people who made bad choices. Caleb set down his hammer and gestured to the porch steps. Sit for a minute. You look exhausted. I am exhausted. I haven't been sleeping well either. But she sat, and Caleb sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. They watched Lila and Jake examining pine cones with serious concentration. How's the investigation going? Caleb asked. Ongoing. The FBI has the 3 men in custody, but they're not talking. Lawyers, constitutional rights, the whole thing. It's going to be a long process. Victoria leaned back against the porch post, closing her eyes briefly. Meanwhile, I've got a company to run. Board members demanding explanations, security protocols to completely overhaul. My life has become an endless series of meetings and conference calls and risk assessments. Sounds overwhelming. It is, which is why... She opened her eyes and looked at him directly. Which is why I keep finding excuses to come back here. To this cabin in the middle of nowhere. To see a man I barely know who doesn't want anything from me except maybe to fix his porch in peace. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. Is that a problem? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've spent the last decade building walls, carefully constructed barriers between myself and everyone else. You have to, in my world. If you don't, people take advantage. They see you as a resource to be exploited, a connection to be leveraged. So you learn to keep everyone at arm's length, to trust no one completely, to always be on guard. That sounds lonely. It is lonely. It's incredibly lonely. But it's also safe. She paused, choosing her words carefully. And then you find my daughter in the forest, and you help her without asking for anything in return. And suddenly all those carefully constructed walls seem pointless, paranoid, like I've been living in a prison of my own making. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just sat there beside her while Lila's laughter rang out across the clearing as she and Jake debated the merits of various pine cones. I'm not used to this, Victoria continued, her voice quieter now. Genuine kindness, real connection. People who see me as a person rather than a bank account or a business opportunity. It's disorienting, like I've forgotten how to be human and I'm having to relearn it. You're being too hard on yourself. Am I? I can't remember the last time I had a friend who wasn't also a business contact. The last time I went somewhere without security. The last time I did something just because I wanted to, not because it served some strategic purpose. She looked at him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression that made her seem younger than she was. Lila's therapist asked me where I feel safe, like genuinely safe, and I couldn't answer. I've spent so long being vigilant, being careful, being in control. I'd forgotten what safe even feels like. And now? Now I sit on your porch and I feel safe. I watch my daughter collect pine cones with my head of security, and she's laughing and happy and not having nightmares for a few hours, and I feel safe. It doesn't make sense. We barely know you. This place should be just another location on a map, but it's not. Victoria shook her head. I'm sorry. I'm oversharing. You didn't sign up to be my therapist. I don't mind. And he didn't. That was the strange part. Normally, Caleb wasn't comfortable with emotional conversations, with people exposing their vulnerabilities. He'd grown up in a family where feelings were kept private, where you dealt with your problems yourself and didn't burden others. His marriage had fallen apart partly because his ex-wife had said he was emotionally unavailable, that he didn't share enough of himself. But sitting here with Victoria, listening to her struggle to articulate what she was feeling, he didn't feel uncomfortable. He felt honored, in a way, that she trusted him enough to let the walls down, even just a little. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. Sure. Why do you live out here, alone with your son, so far from everything? It can't be easy raising a kid by yourself in such an isolated place. Caleb considered the question. My ex-wife thought I was crazy. She wanted city life, wanted culture and restaurants and proximity to her career. But I grew up in these forests. My grandfather was a ranger. My dad worked for the Forestry Service. Being out here, it's not isolation to me. It's home. It's where I understand the world and my place in it. He gestured to the trees surrounding them. This is real. It's honest. A tree doesn't pretend to be something it's not. A mountain doesn't have ulterior motives. There's a simplicity to life out here that I need. And I wanted Evan to grow up with that same connection to the natural world. Does he like it, living out here? Most of the time. Sometimes he complains about the long bus ride or the lack of fast internet. Sometimes he wishes we lived closer to town so he could see his friends more easily. But he's a good kid. He understands why we're here. Caleb smiled slightly. And honestly, I think he appreciates it more than he lets on. He knows the names of every tree species in this forest, can track animals, identify edible plants, navigate by the stars. Those are skills that matter, skills that connect you to something larger than yourself. I wish I could give Lila that kind of childhood, that kind of freedom. Victoria's voice was wistful. But my life doesn't allow for it. She goes to a private school with armed security. She can't go to the park without bodyguards. Every playdate is vetted. Every friend's parent is background checked. I'm raising her in a gilded cage and I hate it, but I don't know how to do it differently. You could change it if you really wanted to. Could I? Victoria looked at him skeptically. You saw what happened when I let my guard down. Someone sabotaged my plane and tried to kidnap my daughter. How am I supposed to relax after that? How am I supposed to take risks with her safety? I'm not saying you should be reckless, but there's a difference between being careful and being imprisoned by fear. Caleb leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Lila's 6 years old. She should be climbing trees and getting dirty and scraping her knees. She should be allowed to be a kid, not an asset to be protected. That's easy for you to say. No one's trying to kidnap Evan for ransom. No, but I still have to let him take risks, let him ride his bike down steep trails and climb too high and make mistakes, because that's how kids learn. That's how they build confidence and resilience. You can't bubble wrap life, Victoria. It doesn't work. She was quiet for a long moment watching Lila. Her daughter had convinced Jake to help her build some kind of structure out of sticks and pine cones, and the serious security expert was now crouched in the dirt, following a 6-year-old's architectural instructions with complete solemnity. She's happier here than I've seen her in months, Victoria said finally. Even before the kidnapping attempt, she was stressed, anxious, too serious for a kid her age. But here, with you and Evan, with space to run around and things to explore, she's different, lighter. Maybe this place is good for both of you. Here, with you and Evan, with space to run around and things to explore, she's different, lighter. Maybe this place is good for both of you. Victoria turned to look at him, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. Maybe it is. Lila came running back, her hands full of pine cones and her face flushed with excitement. Look how many I found! Jake says some of them are from Douglas firs, and some are from ponderosa pines, and you can tell the difference by the shape. Did you know that? I didn't know that. That's great, honey, Victoria said, standing up and brushing off her jeans. But we need to start heading back. Your appointment with Dr. Chen is in an hour and a half, and traffic might be bad. Do we have to? Lila's face fell. Can't we stay a little longer, please? We'll come back, Victoria promised. Then she looked at Caleb. If that's all right. It's all right. Can Evan come next time? Lila asked. I want to show him how to tell the difference between pine cones, too. And I want to ask him about his school. And I want to know if he likes drawing or if he likes other things better. Caleb smiled. I'll ask him. I'm sure he'd like that. They walked to the SUV together, Lila chattering about pine cones and trees and everything she wanted to do next time. Jake loaded her collection of natural treasures into the back with the same care he might give to valuable evidence. Victoria paused before getting into the vehicle, turning back to Caleb. Thank you, she said quietly. Not just for Lila. For me too. For listening. For not judging. For being... She searched for the word. Human? Yes, human. Exactly that. She smiled, and it transformed her face entirely. Not the professional smile she probably used in board meetings or press conferences. A real smile, warm and genuine. We'll see you soon. Caleb watched them drive away, then returned to his porch repairs. But he found it hard to concentrate. His mind kept drifting back to the conversation, to Victoria's admission about safety and walls and the loneliness of her carefully constructed life. He understood loneliness. His marriage had ended 3 years ago, and since then, he'd thrown himself into work and raising Evan and maintaining the cabin. He'd told himself he was fine alone, that he didn't need the complications of relationships or emotional entanglements, but maybe he'd been building his own walls, just different ones than Victoria's. That evening, after dinner, Evan looked up from his homework with a thoughtful expression. Dad, are they going to keep coming back? Victoria and Lila? Looks like it. Is that okay with you? Yeah, it's okay. Lila's kind of weird, but in a good way. She talks a lot. Evan grinned. Like, a lot. But she's funny, and she actually listens when you tell her stuff about the forest. Most kids don't care. Most kids haven't been through what she's been through. Sometimes trauma makes you see the world differently, makes you appreciate things you might have taken for granted before. Evan nodded slowly, processing this. Victoria seems sad, even when she's smiling, like she's pretending everything's okay, but it's not really. Caleb looked at his son with a mixture of pride and surprise. 12 years old and already reading people with uncomfortable accuracy. Yeah, buddy, I think she is sad. I think she's been sad for a while and she's just really good at hiding it. Are you going to help her? Like you helped Lila? I don't know if I can help her. She's dealing with stuff that's way outside my experience. But I can be her friend, I guess, if that's what she needs. I think that's what she needs, Evan said with the confident certainty of youth. Then he returned to his homework, the subject apparently closed. But Caleb sat with the observation for a long time after Evan had gone to bed. Friend. Such a simple word. Such a complicated reality. Could he be friends with someone like Victoria Hensley? Their worlds were so different, their lives so far apart in almost every measurable way. She lived in penthouses and flew in private jets. He lived in a cabin he'd built himself and drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it. Yet somehow, impossibly, they'd connected. Over trauma and gratitude and shared concern for a little girl who'd been lost in the forest. And that connection, however unlikely, felt real in a way that Caleb hadn't experienced in a long time. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Lila's appointment went well. Dr. Chen says the visits to your cabin are actually therapeutic for her. Something about safe spaces and positive associations. So thank you for that. Also, I've been thinking about what you said, about raising kids and taking risks and not letting fear make decisions. You're right. I know you're right. I'm just not sure I'm brave enough to change things. Caleb typed back carefully. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. You've already proven you have that kind of courage. You told Lila to run when the car was on fire. You saved her life by making an impossible choice. You're braver than you think. A long pause. Then, how do you always know the right thing to say? I don't. I just say what I'm thinking and hope it doesn't come out wrong. Well, keep thinking then. And thank you. Again. Always. For everything. Caleb smiled at his phone, then set it aside. Outside, the forest was settling into its nighttime rhythms. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness. Wind moved through the trees with a sound like distant ocean waves. This was his world, simple and honest and real. But maybe, just maybe, it was becoming someone else's world too. Someone who needed it as much as he needed her, to remember that not all of humanity was cynical and mercenary. That connection was still possible, that walls could come down without disaster following. The next week fell into a pattern that surprised Caleb with its ease. Victoria and Lila came to visit twice more. Once midweek after Lila's school day ended, and once on Sunday afternoon. Each time they stayed a little longer. Each time Victoria seemed a little more relaxed, a little more willing to let her guard down. On Sunday, she brought lunch, fancy sandwiches from some Seattle deli, along with homemade cookies that she admitted her assistant had actually made. They ate on the porch while Lila and Evan explored the forest within sight of the cabin, their laughter echoing through the trees. "I got a call from my head of corporate security," Victoria said, watching the kids. "He wants to increase my protection detail, add more guards, more restrictions, more protocols. He thinks I'm being reckless coming out here without advanced security sweeps. What do you think?" "I think he's probably right from a professional standpoint, but I also think—" She paused, choosing her words. "I think if I let fear dictate every decision, I'll never live. I'll just exist inside whatever bubble they build for me. And that's not the example I want to set for Lila." "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to keep coming here, with Jake, because I'm not completely reckless. But I'm not adding more guards or more restrictions. I'm not turning this into another sterile, controlled environment." Victoria looked at Caleb. "My therapist—" "Yes, I have one now. Lila's not the only one who needs help processing this. My therapist says I need to reclaim my sense of agency. Stop being a victim of circumstance and start making active choices about the life I want to live." That sounds like good advice. It's terrifying advice, but also liberating. She smiled. "This is me making an active choice, choosing to be here, to let Lila be here, to build something that's not about business or security or any of the usual things that dominate my life." "What is it about then?" Victoria considered this. "Friendship, I think. Real, uncomplicated friendship. If that's something you're open to." Caleb felt that tightening in his chest again. That sensation of something shifting and settling into new configuration. "Yeah," he said. "I'm open to that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Evan teach Lila how to identify animal tracks in the soft earth near the tree line. Jake stood at a discreet distance, ever vigilant but less rigid than he'd been on earlier visits. Even he seemed to be relaxing slightly, though Caleb suspected that was relative term for someone with his training. "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria said. "Sure. Your ex-wife, do you still love her?" The question caught Caleb off guard. He thought about it, really thought about it, before answering. "No, I don't think I do. I did once, obviously. But we wanted different things, became different people. The divorce was painful, but it was also right. We're better as co-parents than we ever were as partners." "Does Evan see her much?" "Couple weekends a month. She lives in Portland, has a whole different life there. A boyfriend, a career she loves, friends and social life. She's happy, which I'm glad about. And Evan's doing okay with the arrangement. It's not ideal, but it works." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Lila's father left when she was 2. Decided being a dad was too much responsibility, too much interference with his lifestyle. I haven't heard from him in 4 years. Doesn't pay support, doesn't call, doesn't acknowledge her existence. It's like we were both just inconvenient mistakes he could walk away from. I'm sorry, that's rough. It is rough, but it's also freeing in a weird way. I don't have to negotiate custody or deal with conflicting parenting styles. Lila is mine completely. My responsibility, my joy, my whole world." Victoria's voice softened. "Though sometimes I wonder if I'm enough. If a child needs 2 parents, and by raising her alone, I'm somehow cheating her of a complete family. Family isn't about quantity. It's about quality, about showing up and being present and loving unconditionally. Sounds like you're doing all of that. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together. Work demands, parenting demands, the constant pressure to be perfect because everyone's watching. It's exhausting." "Nobody's perfect. The sooner you accept that, the easier life gets." Victoria laughed. "Is that the secret to your Zen-like calm? Accepting imperfection?" "I'm not calm. I'm just better at hiding my anxiety than most people." Caleb grinned. "Also, living in the woods helps. Hard to stay stressed when you're surrounded by trees that have been here for 200 years. Puts things in perspective." "Maybe I should move to the woods." She said it lightly, joking, but there was something underneath the humor, something wistful. Caleb caught it but didn't push. They talked for another hour about everything and nothing. Books they'd read, places they'd traveled, childhood memories, and future dreams. Easy conversation, the kind that flowed naturally without forced topics or awkward silences. By the time Victoria reluctantly announced they needed to leave, Caleb realized the sun had moved considerably across the sky. "Same time next week?" Victoria asked as they walked to the SUV. "Same time next week," Caleb confirmed. Lila hugged him goodbye, then hugged Evan, then made Jake promise they'd look for more animal tracks next time. Victoria paused before getting into the vehicle, her hand resting on the open door. "This means something to me," she said quietly. "What we're building here. Whatever it is. I want you to know that. It means something to me too." She smiled, and then they were gone, leaving behind only tire tracks in the dirt and a sense of warmth that lingered long after the sound of engines had faded into the distance. That night, Caleb dreamed of forests and safe places, of walls coming down and connections forming in unexpected ways. When he woke, he couldn't remember the details, but the feeling remained. Hope, maybe, or possibility, or maybe just the simple recognition that sometimes, when you least expect it, life brings people into your orbit who change everything without even trying, and the only choice that matters is whether you're brave enough to let them in. October gave way to November, and the visits continued with a regularity that began to feel less like an arrangement and more like a natural rhythm. Victoria and Lila would arrive on Sundays, sometimes Wednesdays too if Victoria's schedule allowed. Each time they stayed a little longer. Each time the formality faded a little more, replaced by something that felt increasingly like family. Caleb found himself looking forward to those visits in a way that both pleased and unnerved him. He'd catch himself straightening up the cabin before they arrived, making sure there was fresh coffee and the good cookies he'd started buying specifically because Lila liked them. He'd find himself thinking about stories to tell Victoria, observations about the forest, or Evan's latest accomplishment at school, small details of his life that he wanted to share with her. It was dangerous, this growing attachment. He knew that. Their worlds were still fundamentally different, separated by more than just geography. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things, and his emotions were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The breakthrough came on a cold Sunday in mid-November, when Victoria arrived alone. Caleb was splitting wood when he heard the single SUV coming down the drive. He set down the axe, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the chill in the air, and felt a jolt of concern when he saw only Jake emerging from the driver's seat, followed by Victoria from the back. "Where's Lila?" he asked immediately. "Sleepover at her best friend's house. First one since the kidnapping attempt." Victoria's smile was proud but tinged with anxiety. "I almost canceled 3 times. Called the parents twice to confirm their security system was adequate. Jake ran a background check on everyone who would be in the house, including the family's housekeeper." "But you let her go." "I let her go. Because my therapist reminded me that hypervigilance isn't the same as good parenting, and Lila needs normal experiences with her peers." Victoria hugged herself against the cold. "I've been a nervous wreck all day. I've checked my phone about 50 times in the last 2 hours. Want some coffee? Might help with the nerves." "Coffee would be amazing." They settled at the kitchen table, mugs warming their hands, while Jake took up his usual position outside. Through the window, Caleb could see Evan working on a school project in his room, headphones on, oblivious to the adult conversation happening in the kitchen. "I didn't think you'd come without Lila," Caleb said. "I almost didn't. But then I realized I wanted to. Not just for Lila's therapy or to check on her well-being. For me." Victoria met his eyes across the table. "Is that strange? That I wanted to see you even without the excuse of my daughter?" Caleb felt his heart rate pick up. "No, it's not strange." "Good. Because I've been having trouble lately distinguishing between what's appropriate and what's just my loneliness talking." She laughed, but there was an edge of vulnerability to it. "I told you I was bad at having friends. Turns out I wasn't exaggerating. You're doing fine." "Am I? Because I feel like I'm constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if I'm imposing, if I'm reading too much into casual kindness, if I'm being that desperate person who clings to anyone who shows them basic human decency." Victoria wrapped both hands around her mug. My assistant asked me yesterday why I keep driving 3 hours each way to visit a forest ranger I barely know. I didn't have a good answer. Or rather, I had an answer, but it felt too vulnerable to say out loud. What was the answer? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee like it might contain the words she was looking for. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. That you're the first person in years who's seen me as just Victoria. Not Victoria Hensley, the CEO, not Victoria Hensley, the billionaire, not Victoria Hensley, the tech industry disruptor. Just Victoria. A woman who's tired and scared and trying her best to hold everything together. And that when I'm here, I don't have to pretend. I don't have to be perfect or have all the answers. I can just be. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. It was the first time they'd touched beyond a polite handshake, and the contact sent electricity up his arm. You can always just be here. With me. With us. Whenever you need to. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Why are you so kind? What's in this for you? Does there have to be something in it for me? In my experience, there's always something in it for people. Always an angle, an agenda, something they want. Maybe you've been surrounded by the wrong people. Maybe I have. She turned her hand over so their palms were touching, fingers loosely intertwined. Neither of them moved to break the contact. My board is pushing me to take the company public. It would mean billions more in valuation, massive personal wealth, opportunities for expansion, everything I should want. But you don't want it. I don't know what I want anymore. A year ago, I would have jumped at the opportunity, would have seen it as validation, as the ultimate success. But now, she gestured vaguely. Now I keep thinking about that moment in the forest when I thought I'd lost Lila. When I was certain she was gone and nothing else mattered. Not the company, not the money, not the reputation or the empire I'd built. None of it meant anything without her. That sounds like clarity, not confusion. Does it? Because it feels like I'm questioning everything I've spent the last decade working toward. Like maybe I've been climbing the wrong mountain. Victoria's thumb traced small circles on the back of Caleb's hand, an unconscious gesture that sent warmth through his entire body. I keep having this fantasy. This impossible, ridiculous fantasy where I sell the company, take the money, and just disappear. Move somewhere quiet. Somewhere like this. Raise Lila in a place where she can run around and climb trees and not need armed security everywhere she goes. That doesn't sound impossible, doesn't it? I have obligations. Employees who depend on me. Investors who've trusted me with their money. A reputation to maintain. You can't just walk away from that kind of responsibility. Can't you? Or are you just afraid to try? Victoria looked at him sharply, surprised by the directness of the question. Then her expression softened into something like wonder. You're right. God, you're right. I am afraid. Terrified, actually. Because walking away would mean admitting that I've been chasing the wrong things. That I've sacrificed my happiness and my daughter's childhood for something that ultimately doesn't fulfill me. It wouldn't be admitting failure. It would be choosing differently. Choosing what matters. When did you get so wise? Caleb smiled. I'm not wise. I just have the luxury of a simpler life. Fewer complications, fewer obligations. It's easier to see clearly when you're not drowning in corporate politics and board meetings. Teach me, Victoria said suddenly, her grip on his hand tightening. Teach me how to live like that. How to find peace and simplicity. How to just be. I don't think it's something that can be taught. You just have to let go and trust that you'll be okay. I don't know if I can do that. You already did. You let Lila go to a sleepover even though every instinct was screaming at you to keep her close. That's letting go. That's trust. Caleb squeezed her hand gently. You're stronger than you think, Victoria. She looked at their joined hands, then back at his face, and something shifted in her expression. Something that made Caleb's breath catch. Can I tell you something? Something I probably shouldn't tell you? You can tell me anything. I think about you constantly, more than is appropriate for someone who's supposed to be just a friend. I think about these visits all week. Wonder what you're doing, what you're thinking. I make excuses to text you about mundane things just to have contact. And I know it's probably just because you represent something I need right now. Safety, simplicity, escape from my complicated life. But it feels like more than that. It feels like... She trailed off, uncertain. Caleb's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Like what? Like maybe I'm falling for you, which is insane. We barely know each other. Our lives are completely incompatible. You live in a cabin in the woods and I live in a penthouse in Seattle. You're content with simplicity and I'm drowning in complexity. It would never work. It couldn't work. Victoria was talking faster now, words tumbling out like she'd been holding them back too long. But I can't stop thinking about what it would be like if it could work. If I could just choose this, choose you, choose a different life. The kitchen was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of Evan's music from his room. Caleb felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that what he said next would either pull them both to safety or send them tumbling into the unknown. It's not insane, he said finally, his voice rough. I think about you too, constantly, in ways that probably aren't appropriate for someone who's supposed to be offering platonic support. And you're right, our lives don't make sense together on paper, but nothing about this situation has made sense from the beginning. Not finding Lila in the forest, not you coming back here again and again, not this connection we've built. None of it makes logical sense, but it feels right anyway. Does it? Feel right? Yeah, it does. Victoria stood abruptly, pulling her hand away, and for a moment Caleb thought he'd said the wrong thing, pushed too hard. But then she was moving around the table toward him, and he was standing to meet her, and suddenly they were inches apart, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, smell the expensive perfume she wore mixed with the wood smoke scent from his cabin. This is crazy, she whispered. Probably. We should be rational. Think this through. Consider the implications. Probably. I'm going to kiss you now. Okay. And she did. Tentatively at first, like she was testing the waters, giving him a chance to pull away. But Caleb didn't pull away. He brought his hands up to frame her face and kissed her back with all the wanting he'd been trying to ignore for weeks. She made a small sound against his mouth and pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. The kiss deepened, became something urgent and desperate, weeks of tension and longing finding release. Victoria's back hit the kitchen counter and Caleb bracketed her with his arms, careful even in the midst of passion not to push too hard, too fast. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria's eyes were wide and her lips were swollen, and she looked more alive than he'd ever seen her. Well, she said breathlessly, that happened. Yeah, it did. We should probably talk about it. About what it means. About whether we're making a terrible mistake. Probably. Caleb couldn't stop looking at her mouth, wanting to kiss her again. Or we could not overthink it. I'm very good at overthinking. I've noticed. Victoria laughed, the sound bright and genuine. Then her expression turned more serious. I meant what I said about falling for you. This isn't just loneliness or gratitude or trauma bonding. This is real for me. You're real for me. It's real for me too. Even though I come with a ridiculous amount of baggage, a traumatized daughter, a billion-dollar company, security teams, media attention, and more complications than any sane person would willingly sign up for. Even though, Caleb tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, though I should probably mention I come with baggage too. An ex-wife who occasionally makes things difficult, a 12-year-old son who has opinions about everything, a job that pays barely enough to cover expenses, and a lifestyle that most people would consider poverty-adjacent compared to what you're used to. I don't care about money. You say that now. I mean it. Money has never made me happy. It's bought me security and opportunities and comfort, but not happiness. Never happiness. Victoria's hands came up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. This, though, being here with you, in this drafty cabin that probably violates several building codes, this makes me happy. The cabin definitely violates building codes. I built it myself with YouTube tutorials. That's horrifying and also kind of impressive. They stood there, wrapped up in each other until they heard movement from Evan's room. Victoria stepped back reluctantly, smoothing her hair and trying to compose herself. Caleb felt dazed, like he'd been hit over the head with something heavy and pleasant. Evan emerged from his room, pulling off his headphones, and stopped short when he saw them. His eyes went from his father to Victoria and back again, and something knowing crossed his face. "Hey, Victoria. I didn't know you were here. Just stopped by for coffee." Her voice was admirably steady. "How's your school project going?" "Good. It's about forest ecosystems. Dad's been helping me." Evan looked at his father with an expression that was far too perceptive for a 12-year-old. "You guys okay? You look weird." "We're fine," Caleb said quickly. "Just talking, adult stuff." "Uh-huh." Evan did not look convinced. He grabbed a soda from the fridge and headed back to his room, but not before shooting his father a look that clearly said they'd be having a conversation later. Once he was gone, Victoria dissolved into quiet laughter. "Oh God, he knows. He totally knows. Kids are observant." "Observant?" He looked at us like we were teenagers who'd been caught making out in his kitchen, which, technically, we were. She covered her face with her hands. "I haven't felt this awkward since I was actually a teenager." "For what it's worth, you handle awkward very gracefully." "I really don't. I'm just good at pretending." Victoria lowered her hands and looked at him seriously. "We need to figure this out. What we're doing, where this is going. We can't just kiss in your kitchen and then pretend everything's normal." "Why not?" "Because I overthink everything, remember? And because this affects other people. Lila, Evan, my company, your life here. We have responsibilities." Caleb nodded slowly. "Okay, so let's figure it out. What do you want, Victoria? Not what you think you should want, not what makes logical sense. What do you actually want?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched her wrestle with honesty versus self-protection. Finally, she spoke. "I want to keep seeing you. I want to see where this goes. I want to believe that maybe, possibly, against all odds, we could build something real together. But I'm also terrified of screwing this up, of hurting you or Evan or Lila, of letting my feelings cloud my judgment, of making decisions based on emotion instead of logic. What if emotion is the right thing to base decisions on? What if logic is what's been holding you back?" "That's a very dangerous philosophy for someone in my position." "Maybe. Or maybe it's exactly what you need." Caleb moved closer again, unable to resist the pull. "I'm not saying we should rush into anything. We can take this slow, see how it develops. But I think we owe it to ourselves to at least try. Don't you?" Victoria's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted to concern. "It's Lila. She wants to come home. Says she's not feeling well." "Is she okay?" "Probably just anxious. It's her first sleepover since everything happened. I should have expected this." Victoria was already moving toward the door. "I need to go pick her up. Make sure she's all right." "Of course. Go." She paused at the door, turning back. "This conversation isn't over." "I know." "And that kiss?" "I know." Victoria smiled, soft and genuine. "Good, because I plan on doing it again. Soon. If that's okay with you." "That's very okay with me." She left then, Jake materializing from wherever he'd been discreetly waiting, and Caleb watched the SUV disappear down his driveway with a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation. He'd just kissed Victoria Hensley, had confessed feelings he'd been trying to ignore, had potentially started something that could change everything about his carefully ordered life. "So," Evan's voice came from behind him, "you want to tell me what's going on with you and Victoria?" Caleb turned to find his son leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing an expression that was equal parts amused and concerned. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to know you're into her, and she's into you, which is weird but also kind of cool." Evan shrugged. "She's nice. Lila's nice. They make you smile more than you have in a long time. Since before Mom left, actually." "You're okay with this? If something develops between me and Victoria?" "Dad, you're asking a 12-year-old for relationship advice. That's kind of sad." I'm asking my son if he's comfortable with changes in our family dynamic. Evan considered this seriously. I'm comfortable with you being happy. And if Victoria makes you happy, then yeah, I'm okay with it. Just don't get all weird and gross about it in front of me. Caleb laughed, pulling his son into a brief hug. Deal. No weird and gross behavior. Good. Now can you help me finish this project? It's due tomorrow and I'm stuck on the part about decomposition cycles. They worked on the project together, but Caleb's mind kept drifting back to Victoria, to the kiss, to the conversation, to the impossible possibility of a future together. His phone buzzed an hour later with a text from her. Lila's fine, just overwhelmed. She's home now, eating ice cream and watching a movie. Thank you for today. For everything. For being brave enough to admit what you feel. It made it easier for me to be brave too. Caleb smiled at the screen and typed back. Bravery is your specialty. You just forgot for a while. Glad I could remind you. When can I see you again? And I mean see you, not bring Lila and pretend that's the only reason I'm coming. Whenever you want. Tomorrow? I have a shift at the ranger station until 3. After that, I'm free. I'll be there at 4, just me. We need to talk more, and maybe do less talking too. Caleb's heart stuttered, looking forward to both. That night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. The vulnerability in Victoria's confession, the desperation in their kiss, the promise of something more hanging between them like possibility made tangible. He knew they had obstacles ahead, real, significant obstacles that couldn't be ignored or wished away. Their lives were fundamentally different. The media attention alone, if their relationship became public, would be intense and invasive. And there was Lila to consider, and Evan, and the question of how two people from such different worlds could build something lasting. But underneath all those practical concerns was a current of something stronger. Hope, maybe, or conviction. The bone-deep certainty that sometimes, against all logic and reason, two people found each other at exactly the moment they both needed finding. And that refusing to pursue that connection, out of fear or practicality, would be a bigger mistake than any challenge they might face together. Victoria had asked him to teach her how to live simply, how to find peace. But maybe what they really needed to teach each other was how to be brave, how to take impossible chances on improbable connections, how to trust that sometimes the most illogical choice is the right one. The forest outside his window was dark and deep and full of mystery. Somewhere out there, Victoria was tucking Lila into bed and probably overthinking everything that had happened. Somewhere out there, their futures were converging in ways neither of them could fully predict or control. And for once, that uncertainty didn't feel frightening. It felt like the beginning of something worth fighting for, something worth the risk, something that might, impossibly, turn out to be exactly what they'd both been searching for without knowing it. Caleb closed his eyes and let himself imagine it. A future where Victoria's visits weren't temporary escapes, but permanent homecomings. Where Lila and Evan grew up together, siblings in all but blood. Where the cabin in the woods became a sanctuary not just for him, but for all of them. It seemed impossible, ridiculous even. But then again, so did finding a billionaire's daughter lost in the forest. So did building a friendship with a woman whose life was the polar opposite of his own. So did falling for someone so completely wrong on paper and so utterly right in every way that mattered. Sometimes, Caleb thought as sleep finally claimed him, impossible was just another word for hasn't happened yet. Victoria arrived at exactly 4 o'clock the next day, and Caleb knew the moment he saw her face that something had shifted overnight. She wasn't wearing her usual composed CEO expression. Instead, she looked tired and determined, like someone who'd spent the entire night wrestling with a decision and had finally reached a conclusion. Jake stayed in the SUV this time, giving them privacy. Victoria walked up the porch steps slowly, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, and when she reached Caleb, she didn't say hello. She just stepped into his arms and held on tight, her face pressed against his chest. "I called an emergency board meeting this morning," she said, her voice muffled by his shirt. Told them I'm stepping down as CEO. Caleb's arms tightened around her. Victoria, I'm not selling the company. Not yet, anyway. But I'm removing myself from day-to-day operations. Promoting my COO to CEO, staying on as chairman of the board, but in an advisory capacity only. She pulled back to look at him, and her eyes were bright with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I'm choosing differently. Like you said, I'm choosing what matters. Are you sure? That's a massive decision. You don't have to. I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything. Victoria's hands came up to frame his face. I've spent 10 years building an empire I don't even enjoy running anymore. 10 years sacrificing my happiness and my daughter's childhood for quarterly earnings reports and investor expectations. And for what? More money I don't need? More recognition I don't want? A legacy that means nothing if I'm too exhausted and disconnected to appreciate it? What did the board say? They were shocked. Some of them tried to talk me out of it. My CFO actually asked if I was having a breakdown. She laughed, but there was an edge to it. Maybe I am. Maybe this is what a breakdown looks like. Finally admitting that the life you've built doesn't fit anymore and having the courage to change it. Caleb led her inside, settled her on the couch, and put the kettle on. Through the window, he could see Jake leaning against the SUV, phone to his ear, probably reporting this development to whoever needed to know. When Caleb returned with tea, Victoria had composed herself slightly, though her hand still trembled as she took the mug. Tell me I'm not crazy, she said. Tell me I'm doing the right thing. I can't tell you that. Only you know if it's right. That's not helpful. It's honest. Caleb sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. What I can tell you is that you're brave. That making a choice this big, this life-altering, takes incredible courage. And that whatever happens, you're doing it for the right reasons. Victoria sipped her tea, her eyes distant. Lila doesn't know yet. I'm going to tell her tonight. I think she'll be happy. It means more time with her, fewer business trips, fewer nights working late. But it also means changes, big ones. We might need to move, scale back our lifestyle. The media will have a field day with this story. Will they? A tech CEO stepping down in her prime, especially a woman CEO, they'll speculate endlessly. Mental breakdown, family crisis, company troubles. The theories will be vicious and mostly wrong. She set down her mug and turned to face him fully. And if they find out about you, about us, it'll get worse. They'll paint you as a distraction or a gold digger or whatever narrative fits their assumptions. Your privacy will evaporate. Your life will be dissected by strangers. It won't be fair, but it's what will happen. I'm not worried about that. You should be. I've lived with media scrutiny for years, and it's exhausting. But you've built a life here that's peaceful and private. I don't want to destroy that. Caleb took her hand, threading their fingers together. You're not destroying anything, and I'm not afraid of scrutiny. Let them speculate. Let them write whatever stories they want. The truth is simple. I care about you. I want to see where this goes. Everything else is just noise. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly naive. Probably both. He smiled, but that's not changing my mind. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in silence for a while. Outside, the November afternoon was fading into evening, the sky turning the color of bruised plums. Caleb could hear Evan moving around in his room, the familiar sounds of home that had become the soundtrack to his life. I've been thinking about what comes next, Victoria said eventually. Practically speaking, I'll still need to be in Seattle part-time for board meetings and major decisions, but most of my work can be done remotely now, which means I could be anywhere. Could be here if you wanted that, if you were ready for that. Caleb's heart kicked against his ribs. You want to move here? Not immediately. Not until we're sure this is real and lasting and not just an intense connection born from trauma. But eventually? Yes. I want Lila to grow up somewhere like this. Somewhere safe and real and grounded. I want to wake up without armed guards outside my door. I want to breathe without the weight of constant responsibility crushing me. She lifted her head to look at him. And I want to be with you. See where this relationship goes without the complication of distance and competing priorities. That's a lot of change very quickly. I know. And if it's too much, if I'm moving too fast or assuming too much, tell me now. I don't want to upend your life without your consent. Caleb thought about it, really thought about it. Letting Victoria into his life, fully, permanently, would change everything. His peaceful solitude would end. His anonymous existence would evaporate. There would be complications and adjustments and challenges he couldn't even anticipate yet. But when he tried to imagine his life without her now, without these visits and conversations and the connection they'd built, it felt empty, incomplete. I want this too, he said finally. Want you here. Want to build something together. But we need to be smart about it. Take it one step at a time. Let Evan and Lila get used to the idea. Make sure we're compatible when the crisis is over and real life sets in. So we're doing this? Actually doing this? Yeah, we're doing this. Victoria kissed him then, soft and deep and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was smiling, a real smile, unguarded and genuine. I need to go tell Lila, and you probably need to have a proper conversation with Evan about what's happening. Probably, though I think he's already figured most of it out. Smart kid. Gets it from his mother, Caleb said wryly. She was always the smart one. I'm just stubborn and lucky. You're more than that, so much more than that. Victoria stood, reluctant to leave but knowing she needed to. Can we come back this weekend, all of us? I'd like Lila and Evan to spend more time together if we're going to be blending our families eventually. Blending our families. That sounds serious. It is serious. At least I'm serious about it. Are you? Caleb stood and pulled her close one more time. Yeah, I'm serious about it too. After she left, he found Evan in the kitchen making a sandwich with the casual confidence of a kid who'd been fending for himself at mealtimes since he was old enough to reach the counter. His son looked up when Caleb entered, one eyebrow raised in question. So, Evan said around a mouthful of peanut butter, you and Victoria are like together now? Looks that way. How do you feel about that? Evan chewed thoughtfully, considering. Honestly, it's kind of weird, but also not. Like you've been happier the last few weeks than I've seen you in forever. And Victoria's cool. Different from Mom, but cool in her own way. And Lila's pretty awesome for a 6-year-old. She's almost 7, Caleb corrected automatically, then laughed at himself. Listen, this might mean changes, big ones. Victoria's talking about eventually spending more time here, maybe even moving closer. That would affect our life, our routine. I need to know you're okay with that. Dad, I'm 12. I don't get a vote in your love life. That would be super weird. Evan took another bite of sandwich. But if you're asking if I like them and if I'm okay with them being around more, yeah, I am. Victoria treats you like you matter. And she treats me like I'm a person, not just some kid. That's cool. Caleb felt a rush of affection for his son, for this almost teenager who was navigating these changes with more maturity than Caleb had any right to expect. When did you get so grown up? I've always been grown up. You just don't notice because you still see me as a little kid. Fair point. They ate dinner together, talking about school and the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday and whether they should finally fix the leak in the roof before winter really set in. Normal things, comfortable things. But underneath the normalcy was an undercurrent of change, of futures being rewritten and possibilities opening up. That weekend, Victoria and Lila arrived mid-morning on Saturday, and this time Lila bounded out of the SUV with the energy of a child who'd fully recovered from her trauma. She made a beeline for Evan, chattering about a book she'd read and a drawing she'd made, and could he please show her how to identify more animal tracks because she'd tried on her own but wasn't sure if she was doing it right. Evan bore this assault of enthusiasm with good-natured patience, letting Lila drag him toward the forest while promising they wouldn't go far. Jake followed at a discreet distance, and Caleb found himself alone with Victoria on the porch. She's doing better, Victoria said, watching her daughter with obvious relief. The nightmares are less frequent. She's laughing more. Her therapist says she's processing the trauma in healthy ways. Kids are resilient. They are. More resilient than adults sometimes. Victoria leaned against the porch railing. I told her about stepping down as CEO. She asked if it meant we'd have more time for parks and museums and adventure days, as she calls them. When I said yes, she literally jumped up and down. That's a good sign. It is, though I also told her we might be making other changes soon, spending more time in Oregon, possibly moving here eventually. She was very interested in whether that meant she'd get to see you and Evan more often. What did you tell her? I told her yes, that we're all becoming very good friends and good friends spend time together. Victoria smiled. She wanted to know if you could teach her about forests the way you teach Evan. I said I thought you'd be happy to. I would be. They spent the day together, all four of them plus Jake, who maintained his professional distance but seemed fractionally more relaxed than usual. They hiked a nearby trail that Caleb knew was safe and beautiful, with a waterfall at the end that made Lila gasp with delight. They collected leaves and identified trees and talked about the ecosystem in ways that made both kids genuinely interested rather than just politely attentive. Watching Evan patiently explain something to Lila, watching Victoria laugh at something her daughter said, Caleb felt something settle in his chest. This could work, this strange, unlikely blended family they were building. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was, but it could work. That evening, after dinner that Victoria had brought from a restaurant in Seattle, after Lila had fallen asleep on the couch mid-movie and Evan had retreated to his room, Victoria and Caleb found themselves alone in the kitchen washing dishes. I could get used to this, Victoria said softly, handing him a plate to dry. Washing dishes? Domestic normalcy, simple evenings with simple pleasures. No business crisis, no media scrutiny, no endless obligations. Just this. She gestured to encompass the cozy kitchen, the sleeping child in the next room, the quiet contentment of the moment. This is nice, Caleb agreed. But it won't always be this simple. Reality has a way of intruding. I know, but I'm choosing to enjoy it while it lasts. Victoria rinsed the last dish and dried her hands. The board officially accepted my resignation yesterday. It'll be announced Monday. After that, everything changes. The media storm will be intense. I'm prepared for that, but I wanted to warn you. They'll dig into my life, try to find the reason behind my decision. It's possible they'll find out about you. Let them find out. You say that now. Victoria. Caleb took her hands, making her look at him. I'm not afraid of the media. I'm not afraid of scrutiny or speculation or whatever narrative they want to spin. What we have is real. What we're building is worth protecting. And I'm not going to hide or pretend otherwise just because it might be uncomfortable for a while. Tears welled in her eyes. How are you this good? This steady? I've spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who calculate every move, who see relationships as transactions and emotions as weaknesses. And then there's you, just being fundamentally decent without any ulterior motive. I'm not that good. I'm just a guy who knows what matters and what doesn't. He pulled her close, feeling her relax against him. What matters is this: you, me, our kids, building something real together. Everything else is just noise we can learn to tune out. Victoria lifted her face to kiss him, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just certainty and heat and promise. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, she smiled against his mouth. I love you, she said quietly. I know it's too soon to say that. We've only known each other a few weeks. But I do. I love you. Caleb felt his heart expand in his chest, filling with something warm and golden and terrifying in its intensity. I love you too. Have for a while now, actually. Just didn't want to scare you off by saying it. You couldn't scare me off. I'm too stubborn to scare easily. She laughed, wiping at her eyes. God, I'm crying. I never cry. You've turned me into someone who cries. I'll take that as a compliment. They stood there in his kitchen, holding each other while Lila slept peacefully in the next room, and Evan's music filtered softly from down the hall. This moment, Caleb thought, was what happiness felt like. Not the explosive joy of major victories or the adrenaline rush of adventure, just this quiet contentment, this bone-deep certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with exactly the right people. Monday came too quickly. Caleb was at the ranger station when his phone started buzzing with unusual frequency. Text messages from numbers he didn't recognize, calls from unknown contacts. He ignored most of them, but when his brother called, he answered. "Have you seen the news?" Tom demanded without preamble. "What news?" "Victoria Hensley stepping down as CEO. It's everywhere. CNN, tech blogs, business news. They're going crazy trying to figure out why." A pause. "Caleb, some of the speculation is mentioning you. Apparently someone saw her SUV at your cabin multiple times. Connected the dots." Caleb's stomach tightened. That was fast. "It's the internet age, man. Nothing stays private anymore." Tom's voice was concerned but not judgmental. "Are you okay? Is this going to be a problem?" "I don't know yet. Probably, but we knew it was coming." "We? So you two are actually together? Like, seriously together?" "Yeah, we are." Tom whistled low. "Okay then. Well, brace yourself. It's about to get weird." Weird was an understatement. By Tuesday, Caleb's name was appearing in articles and blog posts. By Wednesday, there were photographers camped at the end of his driveway, held back only by Jake and an additional security team Victoria had insisted on deploying. By Thursday, Evan's school had called about reporters trying to talk to students. Through it all, Victoria remained calm and resolute. She issued a single statement through her publicist. "My decision to step down as CEO was motivated by a desire to prioritize my family and personal well-being. I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had and excited for the company's future. I ask that the media respect my privacy and the privacy of those close to me during this transition." It didn't stop the speculation, but it did slow it slightly. And true to his word, Caleb weathered the storm without flinching. He declined all interview requests, ignored the photographers, and went about his life as normally as possible. Victoria couldn't visit the cabin during this initial media frenzy, but they talked every night, long conversations that reassured them both that what they had was strong enough to survive scrutiny. 2 weeks later, when the initial furor had died down and the media had moved on to other stories, Victoria made the drive again. This time she came alone, late in the evening after Evan had gone to bed. Caleb heard the vehicle and went outside, finding her standing by her car. She'd driven herself this time. No security detail, no Jake maintaining professional distance. "Hi," she said, suddenly shy in a way he'd never seen her. "Hi yourself." He walked toward her, watching the way the porch light caught in her hair. "How are you holding up?" "Better now that I'm here." She moved into his arms like coming home. "The last 2 weeks have been hell. Every decision I made was questioned, every statement analyzed. My parents called to ask if I was having a mental breakdown. My ex-business partner suggested I was being manipulated. And through it all, I just wanted to be here, with you." "You're here now." "I am, and I'm not leaving." Victoria pulled back to look at him seriously. "I mean that literally. I put my Seattle penthouse on the market. I'm moving to Oregon. I found a property about 20 miles from here, big enough for Lila and me, private enough to avoid attention, close enough to visit whenever we want." Caleb's heart stuttered. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. I want this life, Caleb. Want to wake up to mountains instead of skyscrapers. Want Lila to grow up with space and freedom. Want to build a real relationship with you without constant interruption." She smiled. "Plus, Lila has informed me that she intends to marry Evan when she grows up, so we might as well get used to being neighbors." Caleb laughed. "Evan will be thrilled to hear that. He'll survive. He's a good kid. They both are." Victoria's expression softened. "I know this is fast. I know we're still figuring things out. But I also know that life is short and opportunities are fleeting, and when you find something real, you hold on to it. So that's what I'm doing. I'm holding on." "I'm holding on too." They went inside, and Caleb made tea while Victoria settled at the kitchen table like she'd done it 1,000 times before. They talked about practical things, her new property, Lila's new school, the logistics of blending their lives. But underneath the practical discussion was something deeper, a foundation being laid brick by brick. "I want to do this right," Victoria said. "Take our time, let the kids adjust, make sure we're building something sustainable." but I also want you to know that I'm committed. To you, to us, to whatever future we're creating together. I'm committed too, for the long haul. Even when it's hard, even when the media won't leave us alone, or people question our choices, or we have to figure out how to merge two completely different lifestyles? Especially then. Caleb reached across the table to take her hand. I'm not walking away, Victoria. Not from you, not from this. You're stuck with me. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Good, because you're stuck with me too. The months that followed were a study in adjustment and compromise. Victoria moved into her new property in January, and suddenly their relationship shifted from long-distance longing to everyday reality. They had their first real fight about discipline strategies for the kids, their second fight about whether Jake needed to maintain constant security presence or if they could relax slightly. Their third fight about money, when Victoria wanted to pay for renovations to Caleb's cabin, and he insisted on maintaining his independence. But between the fights were moments of profound joy. Watching Lila and Evan become genuine friends, siblings in spirit if not in blood. Waking up next to Victoria and seeing sunlight filter through curtains onto her sleeping face. Family dinners that felt chaotic and perfect. Hiking trips where all four of them discovered new trails together. By spring, the media had largely lost interest in their story. Victoria Hensley had become a footnote, a former CEO who'd stepped away from the spotlight to live quietly in Oregon. New scandals and stories had captured public attention. They were free to live their lives without constant scrutiny. One evening in late April, with wildflowers blooming across the mountain meadows and the world feeling fresh and new, Caleb found Victoria standing on his porch watching the sunset. She'd been at his cabin more often than her own lately, and he'd stopped questioning it, stopped worrying about what it meant. It just felt right. Lila asked me today when you were going to be her dad, Victoria said without preamble. Caleb's breath caught. What did you tell her? I told her that these things take time, that we're building our family in our own way, at our own pace, but that you already are important to her, that you already take care of her and teach her things and keep her safe. Victoria turned to look at him. Then she asked if that meant you were going to marry me. That's a very direct question from a 7-year-old. She's nothing if not direct, Victoria smiled. I didn't have a good answer for her, because I don't know what you want, where you see this going, if marriage is even something you'd consider after one divorce already. Caleb moved to stand beside her, looking out at the forest that had brought them together, at the world that had shifted to accommodate their unlikely connection. I've been thinking about it, he admitted, about what forever looks like with you, whether I'm ready for that kind of commitment again. And I think I am. Think I've been ready for a while now, actually. Just waiting for the right moment, the right words. He turned to face her fully. I love you, Victoria. Love the life we're building together. Love watching our kids become family. Love who I am when I'm with you. And yeah, I want to marry you. Want to make this official, permanent, real in every way that matters. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. It's just the truth. I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes. So much that I can't imagine my life without you anymore. She laughed through her tears. Is this the part where you get down on one knee? Because I feel like there should be a grand gesture here. I don't have a ring. Didn't plan this conversation. I don't need a ring. I just need you. So Caleb kissed her instead, there on his porch with the Oregon sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, with their children's laughter echoing from inside the cabin where Evan was teaching Lila some card game. He kissed her with all the love and promise and commitment he could pour into the gesture, and when they broke apart, both were smiling. We should probably tell the kids, Victoria said. Probably, though I suspect Lila already knows. She seems to know everything before we do. They went inside together, hands linked, and found Evan and Lila in the middle of an intense card game. Both kids looked up when they entered, and something in the adults' expressions must have given them away, because Lila immediately squealed. You're getting married! I knew it! Evan, they're getting married! Evan looked at his father, then at Victoria, then back at his father. Seriously? Seriously, Caleb confirmed. Cool. Does this mean Lila's officially my sister? because she's been telling everyone at school that anyway, but it would be nice to make it official. Lila launched herself at both adults, hugging them with the fierce enthusiasm only a 7-year-old could muster. This is the best day ever. Can I be the flower girl? Can we have the wedding here? Can we invite everyone? One question at a time, honey, Victoria laughed, smoothing her daughter's hair. We'll figure out all the details later. For now, just know that we're going to be a real family, all of us together. We were already a real family, Lila said matter-of-factly. We just didn't have the paperwork yet. That night, after the kids had finally gone to bed, still buzzing with excitement about the wedding, Victoria and Caleb sat on the porch in comfortable silence. The forest around them was alive with night sounds, crickets and owls and the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "A year ago I was drowning," Victoria said quietly. "Drowning in obligations and expectations and a life I'd built but didn't actually want. And then Lila got lost in this forest, and you found her, and everything changed. Everything changed for me, too. Do you ever think about how unlikely this is, that we found each other at all, that all the pieces fell into place exactly right? All the time. But I'm learning to just accept good things when they happen instead of questioning them to death." Victoria laughed. "You're teaching me that, too, among other things." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for finding Lila that night, for being exactly who you are, for being patient with me while I figured out how to let my walls down, for building this life with me. Thank you for being brave enough to choose differently, for taking a chance on this, on us." They sat there until the moon rose, silver light filtering through the pine branches, and Caleb thought about the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A cry in the forest, a lost child, a desperate mother, and somehow, impossibly, a love story that neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed. The wedding was small and simple, held in late summer in a meadow near Caleb's cabin. Victoria wore a simple white dress and flowers in her hair. Lila was indeed the flower girl, taking her duties very seriously. Evan stood as Caleb's best man, proud and only slightly embarrassed by the whole thing. Jake was there, finally smiling openly, having accepted that his role had shifted from protecting Victoria from danger to protecting the happiness she'd found. As Caleb said his vows, looking into Victoria's eyes and seeing his entire future reflected there, he thought about the ranger who'd told him once that the forest had a way of bringing people what they needed, even if they didn't know they needed it. At the time, he'd thought it was hippie nonsense. But standing here now, with the woman he loved and their blended family surrounding them, he understood. The forest had given him Victoria, and Victoria had given him a reason to believe in second chances, in impossible connections, in love that defied logic and thrived anyway. "I love you," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I love you too," Victoria replied, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for finding me, for saving me. You saved me too. We saved each other." And when they kissed as husband and wife, with their children cheering and the Oregon wilderness bearing witness, Caleb knew with absolute certainty that this was how love was supposed to feel. Not perfect, not easy, but real and true and worth every challenge they'd faced to get here. Years later, when people asked how they met, Victoria would smile and say it was the most unlikely love story imaginable. A billionaire CEO and a forest ranger, brought together by tragedy and trauma, building a life that made no sense on paper, but perfect sense in reality. And Caleb would add, with his characteristic simplicity, that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places, that a single cry in the forest could change everything, that being in the right place at the right time, with the right heart, could lead to miracles you never saw coming. Their life together wasn't always easy. They had challenges like any couple, adjusting to blended family dynamics, managing Victoria's continued business obligations, dealing with occasional media interest in their unusual story. But they faced it all together, with the same courage and commitment that had brought them together in the first place. Lila and Evan grew up as true siblings, their bond forged in the crucible of that first traumatic night and strengthened by years of shared adventures in the Oregon wilderness. Lila became an artist, channeling her creativity into paintings of forests and safe places. Evan followed his father into forestry, though he approached it with a more scientific bent, studying ecology and conservation. And every year on the anniversary of the night Caleb found Lila in the forest, they would all hike out to that same spot, now marked with a small wooden bench Victoria had commissioned. They'd sit there together, remembering how far they'd come, how much they'd built, how a single moment of crisis had led to a lifetime of love. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked Victoria one such anniversary, 20 years after that fateful night. They were older now, graying at the temples, but their connection had only deepened with time. "Regret what?" "Giving up your company, the life you had, everything you walked away from." Victoria looked around at the forest, at their adult children laughing together nearby, at the life they'd built in this quiet corner of Oregon. "Not for a single second," she said. "This is what success looks like. This is what matters. Everything else was just noise." And Caleb, looking at the woman who'd changed his life completely, who'd taught him that walls could come down and hearts could heal and love could bloom in the most unlikely soil, knew exactly what she meant.